Hello, this is my presentation, Enchanted Landscapes, Fairies and Cultural Identity in Northwestern Spain. So I would like to start expressing my gratitude to the research group Studies on Intermediality as Intercultural Mediation. So fairy belief within Celtic traditions has long occupied a significant place in the study of European folklore, typically associated with regions such as Ireland, Scotland, and Brittany. However, the Iberian Peninsula, particularly the northwestern regions of Spain, including Galicia, Asturias, and parts of Cantabria, preserves a rich and often understudied corpus of fairy lore that reflects both broader Celtic cosmologies and localized cultural adaptations. There is a complex interplay between myth, landscape, and social worldview. So the notion of fairies in Celtic tradition is best understood not as a singular category, but as a diverse grouping of supernatural beings associated with the other world, a parallel realm that intersects with human experience. In the Spanish context, these beings are often referred to by region-specific names such as modas or modos, shanas, and anjanas. While terminology varies, these entities share common characteristics with the wider Celtic fairy tradition. They are liminal figures inhabiting thresholds between the natural and supernatural, frequently tied to ancient sites such as megaliths, caves, rivers, and forests. In this picture, we can see on the left side a drawing from the Irish tradition about fairies, and on the right side, a piece of street art in Fene, Ferrol, Galicia, and it is called Modas. Let us take a step back towards the origin of the word fairy. How do most people picture a fairy nowadays? Surely most of us think of small supernatural beings with wings and a magic wand that releases pixie dust while in flight or after a spell that has been casted. The truth is most supernatural beings in our social imaginary have been considered fairies at a certain point in history. Probably stemming from the Latin word fata, Old French fere, and simple fée in English, most scholars agree it both conveys the meaning of fate and fair. Thus, these beings have been collectively imagined influencing human affairs, altering fate, if we may put it that way, and were also perceived in some regions as pure, brighter beings or sparkling entities brimming with special powers, vitality, and the ability to be a judge of character. That is why they have also been called the fair folk. We should not be deceived by some of the words I have just thrown out there. Pure and bright do not necessarily imply good-natured. True, part of the folklore insists on emphasizing on the good side, yet plenty of tales and myths portray quite an opposite impression, as the human protagonists are often left impaired, crippled, or wind up losing their life. This duality between good and evil has long been studied, and we now know those stories served an educational purpose. If the tale's protagonists act in a proper manner or trying to be fair, fairies would reward them for their good judgment. Otherwise, chaos could ensue and they would face serious consequences. So in this picture, we see a drawing by Cristina Rossetti, and the text says, Lizzie uttered not a word, would not open lip from lip, lest they should cram a mouth in. Throughout the past millennia, these stories have been obviously greatly influenced by religion, specifically Christianity in Europe, which has reinterpreted most of the oldest pagan stories and split supernatural beings into good ones, clearly angels, and evil ones, demons. But the word fairy and the most relevant beings have retained part of its former glory. While being regarded mostly as kind-hearted, some more recent stories imply they can still be tricky beings that deceive humans out of pure boredom. So, if we delve deeper into these stories, we find ourselves with the need to answer the following question: how did the Iberian Peninsula come to inherit such a culturally rich mythology, and how much has it changed since its origins? The answer is both simple and complex. It is simple to imagine where it all comes from, but difficult to break it down. Spain and Portugal were visited or occupied by multiple different tribes and empires. It was also a melting pot of cultures which left their indelible imprint in all aspects of present life. This has clearly influenced its cultural identity, especially with regards to beliefs, myths, and legends. More specifically, the Celts, Arabs, Jews, Romans, Goths, and some other tribes have brought their own traditions and stories with them, and those have been spread around since ancient times through oral tradition, and some even translated and rewritten. So, stemming from our peninsula, there is also the comprehensive Disciplina Clericalis, a collection of 33 exemplars, short stories that have been an exemplary purpose, which come from Christian, Muslim, and Jew sources. The peninsula's social imaginary includes myths, legends, poems, songs, proverbs, ballads, fables, romances, coplas, riddles, and exempla, to name but a few. These have played and still play an important role in the upbringing of our children. So what we see here in this picture is actually a picture taken in 1979 with the ethnomusicologist Dorothea Schubert. And these are two women from the north of Spain, from Galicia, from Murcia. So Aurelio Espinosa, in Cuentos Populares de España, proposed a classification for the multiple types of tales he found here. Those were tales of riddles, witch tales, human tales, moral tales, tales of enchantment, rogue tales, noble tales, tales of jokes, and so on. So fairy tales belong to several categories, as it is usual, particularly tales of enchantment, witch tales, and moral tales. Oral transmission constitutes another essential feature of this folkloric tradition. Stories, songs, and beliefs have historically been passed down through generations by word of mouth, often within rural communities. Another question arises while studying mythology diversity in the peninsula. Why was it never homogenized throughout the centuries? Surely people spread tales and carried them over from town to town. So how do we still find plenty of different sources and multiple versions of very similar background? Why do Shanas, Hanas, or Anhanas, Modas, and Donas d'Agua share so many similarities yet vary enough throughout folklore? According to some scholars, geography played a crucial role in its preservation. As the terrain is very diverse and contains many mountain ranges, valleys, cliffs, plains, and even cave systems, this provides natural barriers that isolated most communities before the entirety of the peninsula was well communicated. Such fragmentation allowed oral tradition and local myths to persist over long periods of time. Moreover, the Pyrenees in the north prevented any leaks or cultural interference, thus strengthening its own cultural identity. Perhaps a key factor in diversity preservation is language. There are several different languages in Spain and Portugal as well. Apart from our dialects, there's Spanish, Catalan, Basque, Galician, and Portuguese, which difficult even further the interpreting of myths and stories throughout our history. Also worth mentioning is the consideration of monotheisms had for early pagan myths. Moral and religious authorities have always made it their goal to diminish paganism, for it was perceived as merely superstition and typical from uncultured individuals. This made sense as Catholicism could not directly incorporate earlier myths without denying their own. Therefore, fairy tales were considered non-canonical, and this also affected how many versions of tales pervaded to this day. It wasn't until quite recently that interest in compiling folklore arose. And by the time It did. The aim had shifted. Instead of unification, scholars chose to investigate, compare, and preserve without mixing. So in this picture, we see La Vijanera in Cantabria, which is a tradition to welcome, it's a pagan tradition to welcome winter. There is a specific issue I wanted to address in this discussion. That is the concept of Celtic cultural identity. Commonly associated with Ireland, Scotland, and England, the idea of Celts could very well be a retrospective construction. We find early references to Keltoi and Keltai in Greek and Roman authors to describe certain groups of Western Europe, yet this was most likely used as a broad term instead of suggesting a unified Celtic identity. The notion of a Celtic tradition in Spain has attracted considerable scholarly attention, particularly in relation to the northwestern regions of Galicia, Asturias, and parts of Cantabria. While the historical validity of a unified Celtic identity remains debated, there is broad agreement that these areas preserve a rich body of folklore comprising myths, legends, songs, and oral narratives that has often been interpreted through a Celtic lens. Rather than representing a direct and unbroken survival of Iron Age belief systems, this corpus reflects a complex interplay between pre-Roman and cultural substrates, later historical developments, and modern processes of cultural reinterpretation. In the past centuries, perhaps motivated by several movements, such as nationalism, for instance, there was an interest to trace Celtic origins back to the roots. This context fomented the reinterpretation of the term and its expansion to include linguistic, cultural, and racial dimensions to it, making its background seem more genuine. In conclusion, there was most likely a reconstruction of the term through selective readings of historical sources which aimed to homogenize tradition. Thus, the concept of Celtic tradition we spot today may not accurately reflect historical realities. One of the most notable features of folklore in northern Spain is its strong connection to the natural landscape. Myths and legends frequently situate supernatural beings within specific environmental contexts, such as forests, rivers, mountains, and coastal areas. Figures like the Moras in Galicia or the Llanas in Asturias are often associated with water sources, caves, and ancient ruins. These narratives not only imbue the landscape with symbolic meaning, but also establish a sense of continuity between human communities and their surroundings. Scholars have interpreted this spatial embeddedness as a key characteristic of tradition often labeled as Celtic, where the natural world is perceived as animated by unseen forces. A second defining characteristic is the prominence of liminality. Many folkloric beings and events occur at thresholds, both spatial and temporal. Caves, crossroads, and shorelines function as points of contact between the human world and the supernatural, while transitional times such as dusk, dawn, or specific calendar dates are considered especially potent. This emphasis on liminal spaces and moments aligns with broader patterns observed in European folklore, but it is particularly pronounced in regions associated with Celtic tradition. The recurring motif of the other world, accessible yet separate, underscores a worldview in which reality is layered and permeable. Another characteristic is the coexistence of pre-Christian and Christian elements within the same narratives. Many legends feature supernatural beings that appear to predate Christianity but have been reinterpreted within a Christian framework. For example, enchanted beings may be described as cursed souls or as entities subject to divine authority. This syncretism reflects the historical processes through which older belief systems were not entirely displaced but rather incorporated into new religions and cultural context. The resultant narratives are layered, combining elements from different periods and belief systems. So, in this picture, we see a drawing of La Santa Compañía from the north of Spain. So having said all of this, we shift now to take a look at the motifs and fairies present in the Iberian Peninsula for the past millennia. So these are the most common supernatural beings deemed as fairies in the Northwestern region. So to start, to begin with, we could talk about El Hombre del Saco, also known as the Boogeyman. This monster roams the streets of towns after dusk with a sack to carry off children who misbehave. It is believed that this legend stems from a man who, on the advice of a folk healer, drank children's blood to cure his tuberculosis. Then we have up left the Trasgo, or there are some goblins. As in many other European countries, goblins can be mischievous, malevolent, and cause chaos in homes, but they can also help lost travelers or save children from dangerous situations. Then we have the Modas. They are supernatural beings from Galician and Portuguese folklore who appear as guardians of caves, castles, rivers, treasures, fountains, bridges. They are liminal beings found at specific points such as crossroads between worlds, often located beneath dolmens or hill forts, and they are depicted as women of seductive beauty who comb their golden or black hair. Their narratives frequently involve enchantment, transformation, and conditional interactions with humans, reflecting themes found in Irish and Welsh fairy lore. They remain on the borders of this world and the next, having died without first being baptized. They are shape-shifters. And then we have the Anjanas or Shanas, found in Asturias and Cantabria. Shanas are fairies measuring around 15 centimeters who roam the woods near bodies of water, similar to Greek Lamia. With pale skin, blue eyes, a sweet voice, and reddish hair, they help injured or damaged animals and trees. Such extraordinarily beautiful female spirits who dwell in fountains, rivers, and caves like their Galician counterparts are often linked to treasure and enchantment, and they may interact benevolently or ambivalently with humans. They embody ideals of generosity and moral order. Then we have the culebres. They are giant winged snakes that sometimes take the shanas captive. Then we have the Modos, perhaps also from Modo Gold, and that is the male version of the Modas, and they are giant warriors who leave the Modas to guard their treasures or properties, rocky mountains, caves. They are great builders of underground tunnels and palaces. Also shapeshifters, it is believed that both the Modos and the Modas are the manifestations of ancient pagan beliefs predating the arrival of Christianity, which would explain the megalithic constructions found in the regions of Asturias, Galicia, and northern Portugal. So these are just some examples of the folklore, the fairies in northern Spain, but there are many more. So there are dozens of stories where Modas, Shanas, Anjanas, Lamias, and other fairies interact with humans, both leading to their demise or financial success. Depending on the region, some beings are more benevolent towards their protagonists, while others punish severely humans who fail to respond adequately to the challenges. Plenty of very interesting tales. So there are plenty of very interesting tales which vary greatly throughout the entirety of the peninsula, yet I have selected but a few of the most popular ones. So we have our own tooth fairy, which is Ratoncito Pérez, and its origins are fairly recent. In the 19th century, it was created and inspired by the tooth fairy. So Pérez and his family of mice lived in Madrid in a biscuit tin and used the sewers and pipes to reach children's homes and steal their milk teeth. We also have the wolf boy. This is the story of a boy who at birth was marked by a moda with a symbol of the crescent moon, so that as he grew up on nights of the full moon he would turn into a wolf. On one occasion when he disappeared, The villagers set traps to catch wolves, and a very large one fell into them. They called upon a witch to break the spell, and he finally returned home, bruised but in human form, never to transform again. Mothers would usually charm or mark human kids, sometimes even kidnapping them so that they would grow different and become supernatural beings over time, since they could not have children of their own. We also have the legend of the Moorish house, and that is a story of a peasant who encountered a Moor who asked him for favors in exchange for wealth. The peasant agreed, but the Moor asked him not to reveal their meetings. Sometime later, when the peasant's wife insisted on knowing where such richness came from, the peasant spoke out, and the Moor left a note calling it quits. Perhaps this legend still serves as a reminder that important secrets should never be spread, or one could face the consequences. We also have the legend of the shepherds at the Naranco spring in Valdocin in León, where one of the headwaters of the river Esla rises. There was a Shana combing her hair with a golden comb. A shepherd passed by, and the Shana asked him what he liked most about her. The shepherd, dazzled by the glitter of the gold, replied, "The comb," and the Shana retreated angrily to the spring. When he returned to his flock, the shepherd was horrified to discover that the wolves had decimated it. However, at the Pumarín spring in Blimea, Asturias, a Shana asked the same question of another shepherd, and when he replied that he liked everything about her, for he had never seen such a beautiful woman, the Shana gave him 2 bowls of gold. So oral tradition and folklore have long constituted fundamental components of cultural life in Spain, particularly in regions where historical continuity, linguistic diversity, and strong ties to the landscape have shaped local identities. While modernization and globalization have transformed many aspects of social organization, the persistence of oral narratives and folkloric motifs suggests that they continue to fulfill important cultural, social, and symbolic functions. Among these motifs, the figure of the fairy or fairy-like being occupies a significant place, especially in northern Spain. The need for oral tradition in Spain can be understood in relation to its role as a repository of collective memory. Before widespread literacy, oral transmission was the primary means by which communities preserved and communicated knowledge about their past, their environment, and their social norms. Stories, songs, and legends functioned as mnemonic devices, encoding historical experiences and cultural values in narrative form. Even after the expansion of written culture, oral tradition has remained relevant, particularly in rural areas where it continues to reinforce a sense of continuity and belonging. Folklore also serves as a mechanism for negotiating identity in a culturally diverse society. Spain is characterized by significant regional variation in language, history, and customs, and folklore provides a means of articulating these differences. Beyond its role of identity formation, folklore fulfills important psychological and social functions. It offers frameworks for interpreting uncertainty, misfortune, and the unknown, particularly in contexts where empirical explanations may be insufficient or unavailable. So within this broader context, fairies and fairy-like beings occupy a distinctive place. The purpose of these beings can be interpreted on multiple levels. At a practical level, fairy narratives often function as cautionary tales regulating human interaction with the environment. At a moral level, fairy figures frequently embody systems of reward and punishment. Fairies also fulfill an imaginative and aesthetic function, enriching the cultural landscape with elements of wonder and ambiguity. Their association with liminal spaces and times, twilight, seasonal transitions, or thresholds between environments, underscores their role as mediators between different realms of experience. This liminality allows them to express ideas and emotions that may not be easily articulated within more rational or institutional frameworks. Importantly, the meaning and purpose of fairies in Spain have evolved over time. While they were once integrated into everyday belief systems, they are now more often encountered as elements of cultural heritage, literature, and popular culture. Festivals, tourism initiatives, and regional narratives have recontextualized these figures, sometimes emphasizing their Celtic associations as part of broader identity building processes. Despite this transformation, their symbolic functions mediating between humans and the environment, reinforcing moral values, and enriching cultural imagination remain relevant. Folklore in the northwestern regions of Spain exhibits a set of characteristics: strong ties to the landscape, an emphasis on liminality, oral transmission, integration with music, and religious syncretism that have contributed to its association with Celtic tradition. However, these features should not be taken as definitive evidence of a homogeneous or continuous Celtic culture. Instead, they reflect the dynamic and adaptive nature of folklore shaped by local environments, historical transformations, and modern interpretive frameworks. In conclusion, the continued importance of oral tradition and folklore in Spain reflects their capacity to address enduring human needs, the preservation of memory, the construction of identity, and the interpretation of experience. Within this framework, fairies and related beings serve as powerful symbolic figures that connect individuals to their environment and their cultural past. Far from being obsolete remnants of pre-modern thought, these traditions remain dynamic and meaningful, adapting to new contexts while retaining their core functions. So thank you very much for listening.